Hi, welcome to Radio Omnicor. I'm Colleen McClintock, your host, and I'm joined by Dr. Hilton Rudnick, my co-host. Today we're chatting about the future of work and rewards. Joining us is the insightful Dr. Mark Bussin from 21st Century. A leader in HR and compensation, Mark brings a wealth of knowledge and some intriguing tales from his vast experience. If you are curious about pay gaps or puzzled by pay transparencies, we've got some answers for you, perhaps not the ones you expected, but nevertheless fascinating. If you've ever pondered the future of your paycheck, this is the chat for you. Dive in with us for an episode filled of the unexpected. Welcome, everyone. Hi, Mark. Hi, Hilton. It's wonderful to be back in the studio with our podcast. And we've got such an amazing guest to kick off episode 51. It's lovely to have you, Mark. How are you doing? What's keeping you busy at the moment?
Hi, Colleen. Hi, Hilton.
Hi.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, so it's board work. It's board season and it's budget season, and the boards are frantically trying to set their budgets for next year. Budget setting on plain, flat shoes and brown rice is easy, and budget setting in chaos is not as easy.
So a lot of stuff going on, a lot of complexity for you, and a lot of pressure for you.
Indeed.
Well, it's great that you could join us. We're talking about a very complex subject, I think, really something that's changing all the time, which is the future of work. We live in interesting times, and we're excited to have a conversation with you about your predictions and what you're seeing on the horizon and the changes around reward and performance. So we're excited to chat to you about that.
Thank you very much, Colleen. So it's what I do, and it's also what keeps me awake at night when I'm not in board meetings. And what's changed is Black Lives Matter and COVID had a bigger impact on the working world than I think we actually realize. And there are some things that we used to do, which now, looking back, we wonder how we did it and why we did it. For example, I used to get asked to go to Parliament for a 1-hour meeting. So you set your alarm for 4 a.m., you get to the airport at 5 a.m., you take the flight at 6 a.m., you land at 8 a.m., you do car hire, security, and by the time you're through, you have your 1-hour meeting, you're back at 7 p.m. I'll never do that again. Never, ever. I sit on a board in the United States. I used to fly there for 2.5 days through London, Miami, Arizona. I'm never going to do that again. So we are definitely doing things differently. There's no doubt about it. And then with that comes the conundrum of how do you pay people in this new world of work and this new setup.
Yeah, so I guess that's where you've had to shift your models and thinking with your clients. What have been the biggest changes for you as you consider that?
So clients used to have their employees coming to work every day, sit at the same desk or the same office or hot desk, wherever they used to sit. And suddenly immigration and semigration takes place, and people are saying, I don't want to come into the office. I want to work from the coast or from the Maldives or Mauritius. And the company has realized now that it's actually okay for you to sit somewhere else for some jobs, not all jobs. So we need to get that out of our heads. Some jobs require hands and feet on the ground, but for a lot of jobs, they can be done remotely. So the big conundrum, and let's go a bit global here. Let's say you are Coca-Cola or Microsoft or something like that, and your employees are in the US earning $100, and suddenly they go to South Africa where the cost of living would only be about $60. They've had to decide whether they're going to pay the global rate of $100 or pay the cost of living purchasing power parity rate of $60. The employee says, look, it's my good luck that I moved to a cheaper place. And the employer is saying, hold on, it's cheaper there. I'm going to pay you the equivalent of $100, but the equivalent of $100 in South Africa is $60. And it's the other way around too. If you go to a more expensive place, people are saying, my cost of living's gone up. You need to pay me more. So it does cut both ways. And companies are grappling with their compensation policies because we've always had the word equity and equality in the policy. We want things to be fair. Fair is a better word because most folk don't understand the subtle nuance between equity and equality. When it comes to a pay point of view, there's a huge difference. A lot of time is spent unpacking the difference between equity and equality. I don't mind which word you use, but as long as you use it correctly. And the reason for that is when you have to go to an annual general meeting and defend what you do, or you have to defend what you do to trade unions, or to the Department of Labor, or to the CCMA or Labor Court, you need to have used the correct word because they are definitely going to look it up and use the correct word.
Yeah, I think I certainly, as a business owner, am feeling the heat of the global community. I don't know what they are. Global businesses now have a fair reach to people who would be employed in our business, can be offered jobs really anywhere in the world. And it's, impossible for us to compete with those salaries. Definitely finding ourselves on the back foot. I've seen it in the IT space quite a lot, is that, it's a real job that lends itself to working remotely. Do it from anywhere you want. And why not do it for a foreign company where, your earnings could be way higher than you would in the local currency. So I think that's a real downside of the kind of remote work thing. In other aspects, I feel like there's been a net gain. It's great that, like the example you gave, the whole world of travel has shifted, I think, in a good way. So I think that, the logistics of doing work anywhere has been an improvement. The downside is the kind of cultural artifacts which have been compromised in that way. And I'd be very curious to hear from you about, maybe the kind of interventions or what could be done to accommodate the downside of people actually working in the same room.
Yeah, thank you, Hilton. So, a real life example of what happened to me is that I employ professional assistants that are normally doing their honors or masters. And the last one that left me got a job in New Zealand, but she does it from Santon, doing all the psychometric testing for universities and for employers. And that's the sort of thing we can't match that in rands because it's just too expensive. So the same thing happened with a big mining company. And if you don't mind, I'll share what happened there. A Canadian mining company wanted to hire the whole exco, and they just took the rand amount and changed it to a Canadian dollar. So if you're earning 5 million rand base pay, they just said you'll earn $5 million base pay. And the whole exco went to the board chair and said, stay, because the whole exco actually wanted to go. The board chair phoned me and said, could I do stay interviews? Which is very interesting. And I asked each one of them in turn, what would make you stay? And one person was struggling with their bond. Their bond was only 3.5 million, but for some reason they're struggling. And I said, if we paid your bond off, would you stay? And they said, yes, definitely. And the CFO said he's always had this dream of sitting on an international board. And I said, if we get you on a board in London and we fly you there first class 3 or 4 times a year for a night or two, in other words, you're only gone 8 days, would you stay? And the guy said yes. And to cut a long story short, I went through 8 of the top executives and each one of them stayed for a completely different reason. Now, there was no equality there at all. It was just what the person needed. And luckily, the chair trusted me enough to have an open conversation and agree the answer there and then in the meeting without having to go and ask anyone else. But the cost of losing your CEO and the first line report, 7 of them, in one hit would have been absolutely devastating, I think. So the answer, I think, is to find what people really want and to coin a phrase, my pay, my way, and my work, my way. That means you need to consider Employment Equity Act Section 6. Section 6 talks about equal pay for work of equal value. Now, there's a proviso in that act that says if you can explain the difference, it's fine to have a difference. And people don't really, they're not aware of it. So they say our pay's got to be exactly equal. If you've got 5 junior consultants, 10 consultants, and 15 senior consultants, you can pay them differently depending on what it is that really what they wanted. So if you take Mark, the real me, if you paid me $10 million, you wouldn't get me to a 2-bedroom apartment in London to work there ever. I did that when I was younger. I was working for Price Waterhouse, world firm, and I stayed in a 2-bedroom apartment. I oversaw the Thames. I could see, Parliament, and I will never do that again, because now with 4 kids and the space and the sunshine, that ship has sailed. So funny enough, I was just talking to a German that came into South Africa with a water purification idea. And he says he's never going back to Germany. Now that he's lived here, the value for money and the freedom that you have is just incredible. So I think we undersell the value for money and the freedom that we do have, because there's a lot of freedom here that you don't get in Europe and the US. So the first thing is that among the academics, so one of my hat is in academia, they say you cannot survey fair pay or pay fairness. What you can do is survey constructs around the pay. For example, you can say, do you know how your job description is written? Do you know what job evaluation system you're on? Do you know what the factors are? Do you know where we get the market data from? And based on that, you can, as a proxy, say people are happy or unhappy with their pay. If you ask someone flat out, are you happy with your pay? And you ask a millionaire that, they're going to say no, they want more. And there's this fear that if I say I'm happy with my pay, the company might decide to not give as big increases or bonuses. So I'm not in the camp of, I know we've got the best company to work for surveys, and I know we have all of that, and it's a good dipstick, but there's no organization in the world, including the best organizations. If you think of the global best of Microsoft and Google and Coca-Cola, all of their answers are exactly the same. They're all the lowest. And as it happens, by the way, we are consultants in the area, and we'll help you fix your pay. We'll do an audit, and we'll design better incentive schemes. So that's part one. The part two is we need a definition of fair pay. And if you ask 100 people what fair pay is, the board exec will tell you one thing, the board member will tell you other, the institutional investor will tell you another, and the trade union person will tell you another. So there's no international definition of fair pay. The closest I've got to it is Judge Hutton, who is a British judge who was asked to write what fair pay is, and he wrote it in 80 pages. If ever you're unable to fall asleep one night, I'll email it to you. You can read it. It's 80 pages. The Hutton Fair Pay Report is one way of looking at it. That's too academical and too theoretical. So if we had to answer it more practically, which is really what the question you've asked, it's this. In remuneration, you've got procedural fairness and distributive fairness. Procedural fairness is what process did you follow, and distributive fairness is my absolute pay. I'm more happy with my absolute pay if I understand procedural fairness. And companies can do that, and it's tangential to how transparent companies can be with their remuneration. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with procedural fairness. If I come to the employees and I say, right, we write job descriptions once a year or check them once a year. We look at the job evaluation grade once every 2 or 3 years. These are the 3 factors: problem solving, accountability, know-how, judgment, decision making. We get it vetted by a consultancy. We participate in a salary survey. It's got 300 companies, and we peg ourselves around the midpoint of the market with a normal distribution around the pay. The way you move through the pay scale is through performance and skills acquisition and experience and track record, and that's how we set your pay. Now I understand how you set my pay. Now I'm more likely to be happy with my pay than if I didn't know how to set pay. And that description is not that confidential. It's something you could actually give to all employees, and you could put on the intranet or make it available to employees. So I think fair pay is someone's perception of the process. You can't ask people if you paid enough because you never ever paid enough. But you can ask them what they think of the process. They might say, but why don't you try that job evaluation system or that salary survey? But they very rarely do.
Yeah, in my experience, I mean, most people are fairly realistic around like market rate. I mean, I think market rate is quite a wide range, but people aren't looking to get like triple what the market rate is. They're happy to fall within the parameters of fairness, which I think you're alluding to. But I mean, yeah, of course, everybody, if everybody could double their income, I'm sure they would feel happy that they're now getting paid in a different way.
But I think you're right there, Hilton. There is an innate gut feel, am I paid fairly or not? When people leave, it's often not for the pay reason. It's often they're disgruntled with something in the business. And then the lens that they've got on is clouded, and everything they see then is negative. And I've just got to get out of here. So the acid test of absolutely rock bottom pay and unfair pay is staff turnover. And if you take staff turnover, the national average is about 8%, and the global average is about 10%. Um, Sometimes I ask the question to the board or the Remco or the CEO, what is your staff turnover? And they say, it's 3%. And I say, well, it should be around 8. Not enough people are leaving. You're not getting enough. If you want to benchmark properly and you want to stay with the benchmarks, well, more people should leave. And that, I think that is the acid test of fair pay.
Yeah.
But it leads us to another subject called the vertical pay gap and the horizontal pay gap. And sometimes folk get a bit anxious about the difference between the two. The vertical pay gap is the pay gap between the CEO and the lowest paid worker, the cleaner, the tea person. The horizontal pay gap is two accountants, one male, one female, doing the identical work,
Right.
and the one getting paid more than the other. So what upsets people is the horizontal pay gap. I leave because I think someone else is earning more than me and I think it's unfair. Now, what needs to happen there is that the CEO needs to stand up and say, here are consultants, they've done a pay audit, and there's no one that earns more than 30 or 40 or 50% difference from someone else on the same level and in the same grade.
band.
And that's the reassurance that I think people need and we're not giving them enough of.
So, Mark, it's interesting for us because we've got like exit data, right? We've got a system that collects exit data from really, whatever, thousands of people every year as they transition between companies. And some of the questions we ask are around, are you paid fairly for the work you're doing? We're trying to narrow it down to, are you leaving because of the money? And it's very rare for people to cite the money as an issue. It does happen, but it's very rare. Though we know that most people leaving a job are going to enter another job that pays them more money. So, money comes into the equation, but it doesn't seem to be the reason that is most cited. And in fact, the thing that seems to me to be the bigger pull is around mastery. People feel like, and I don't know if it's this, I don't know if it's a new millennial thing or I'm not sure, but like once people get bored in a job and they feel they can go somewhere else and learn something new, that there's new skills to be gained, there's new mastery somewhere else, they could love the company they work for. They could have a great relationship with their manager, with their colleagues and everything, but it's time to move on because there's just nothing new to learn over here. And I see that as like a key, I don't know if it's a push factor or pull factor from other organizations, but that seems to me a key driver of migrating between jobs.
Hilton, you've hit the nail on the head. And the new mantra for, I think, most staff is my CV growing?
Right.
If my CV is not growing, I will leave. And it used to be most prevalent in the IT industry where if you're stuck on one set of programming or one set of work and you became obsolete, it's now with everybody. I think it's caught on with everybody. If my CV is not growing, I'm going to leave. And it's very interesting. I was asked to do a talk on what motivates people. There's nothing as good as good theory. And way back when, all the good theorists around what motivates people is personal mastery. Are you in charge of what you are doing, and do you know what you're doing, and can you grow in what you're doing? Freedom of choice and master of your own destiny is a huge factor. So retention of staff is perhaps the heading. What does one do to retain staff? And for me, it's about inspirational leadership. Number one is top of the pile. Number two would be, is my CV growing? And now, when it comes to performance management and performance contracts, I sit on a lot of boards, and CEOs report into me. Let's say I give them 5 outcomes or 5 outputs or 5 KPIs. 4 of them are within their reach. I make sure that they can hit it reasonably, 50-50 chance. But one of them I make at 150% of their reach. And that is absolutely, they spend most of their time on that one that they can't reach. And when they hit it, the excitement and you can't believe how happy they are because they hit that one that I said, I bet you can't do this. And it's stretching people. So it's the flip side of the coin that you're saying, if I'm bored, I'm going to leave. But what responsibility does leadership have to inspire people and stretch them?
Yeah.
Let me give you both sides of the coin from my point of view, and then I'll tell you where I landed and where I am now. When I was younger and doing a lot more of the actual remuneration work, I read about this Brazilian company, and it's well known to everyone. And that owner told everyone what everyone earned. They put their pay up on the notice board, and everybody knew what everybody earned. And I thought, how brilliant is that? It's really good. And I've been punting paid transparency for a long time. Last year, my PhD student handed in her thesis on pay transparency, and it's a fairly comprehensive thesis, and it's been published in international journals now. And if I could give you the heading, pay transparency is not cut out all that it's meant to be. It causes more problems than it solves. So I think the starting point for me is to go back and say, what are we trying to solve for? And quite often, pay transparency is not the answer to what you're trying to solve for. It's something else. It's more information. It's more communication. It's more about procedural justice than the absolute pay transparency. And I tested it out with a few lectures. So I lecture MBA students. There are 100 in the class. And I asked them to put their hands up. Who believes in pay transparency? And 99 hands go up. And then I say, just take a moment to tell the person next to you what your salary is, what your last performance appraisal score was, and what your last bonus was. And all of a sudden, they're not that keen. So what I mean by pay transparency, they say, is I want to know what the CEO earns and what other people earn, but I don't want them to know what I earn. So, so the pendulum for me has now swung back to procedural justice rather than distributive justice, which is the absolute pay. I don't think sharing the absolute pay is going to make things better. It'll make things worse. But I do think being more transparent on the process and actually publishing the process and letting every person know will. So that for me is the pay transparency that I think could solve. What are we trying to solve for? Because 9 times out of 10 is I just don't know. So my go-to is tell me what everyone earns. Then I'll decide. I don't mind emailing it to you. I'll email you the articles and the thesis, and if after you've read the Hutton report you still can't fall asleep, then it's a it's a 300-page thesis which you got to plow through with lots of statistics. So why I mentioned the thesis is there's anecdotal evidence, but then there's something called empirical evidence that is statistically tested. This was a huge research in South Africa, and it was statistically tested. It's empirically valid information.
So Mark, I think I'm changing tack here. I'm a school leaver, and I've come to an intersection in my life. I've got to decide, do I go spend a few years at university, maybe 4 or 5 years, get a degree, or should I just skill myself up? There's the gig economy, there's a lot I can do, and I can go learn that stuff for free, probably a lot of it. Have you seen a shift like that in terms of the choices that used to be obvious in terms of tertiary education that now seem more blurry?
The answer is definitely yes. And for my sins, I chair the board of a few schools. And we've just started a new school in Belgravia, Johannesburg, and it's easier to get money and donations for a vocational school, meaning hard skills, plumbing, carpentry, electrics, than it is for an academic school. And yesterday I was talking to about 40 principals at some conference that they were having. And I said, why do parents go through this angst of grade 11 and grade 12 marks for university? And if you don't get into university, you're finished. In my home here, I've got 7 toilets, and when I see my plumber arrive in his brand new cars all the time, plumbers make a lot of money. And we've always got a plumbing problem. And we need to get this out of our heads that you actually have to go to university to be employable. We need skills, and the skills are published by government, and companies are telling us what the skills are. They are practical skills. So it is warming up. It's not going as fast as I'd like to see it, but it definitely is on people's minds now.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of, maybe the situation where I decide to go do a BSc in computer science, or I'm self taught. I've learned everything I need to learn about coding or enough to get started in a job, and decide to, save the years of going to university, believing that I can make an equal contribution if I'm just self taught. It feels like it would take some courage to do that because, the security of having a degree can take you far. But I mean, if this is your children, like what would you advise them?
Yeah, so I mean, that's really good. I've got 4 kids, 3 are at university, but I said study something that will make you employable. And you don't even have to get that at university. So a lot of universities, Hilton, are now putting their lectures on the websites for free, which has also changed what a lecturer needs to do. They can't regurgitate the slides anymore because the students can just read it on their own anyway. They're having to talk around case studies and personal experience when it comes to, and practical examples when it comes to the theory. I'm all for it. I haven't seen a huge shift, but people through necessity have to do it because they cannot get into university, and then what are they going to do? And there aren't enough places to accommodate them to teach them all of these skills. So a wonderful growth area for government would be to get vocational schools up and running, more of them. I'm part of a group that are getting one vocational school up and running. It's in Belgravia. It's part of the Marist Brothers schools. And we open up doors next year. And it's terrifying because you have to get donations to actually get the school going. You have to market it. And we are the ones convincing parents, listen, you need a skill. Parents maybe hang on the words of Nelson Mandela, where he said, education is your freedom. And if you don't go to university, you're not free. But now we can't take education that literally. Education can be, as you say, let's download it off the internet. YouTube tell you how to do almost everything. There's almost nothing that you can't learn yourself. And I think it's a wonderful way to go, and I wish I could see more of it. I agree completely.
Yeah, interesting. I suppose it also, brings up, like for me, the hiring issue that, it feels like we always used to hire people based on kind of a job description and the KPIs and all that kind of stuff. And and then you think the world of work is changing so fast. Should we just be hiring for talent? People who are resourceful, who can switch from one role to another, they are quick learn, they're adaptable, and less fixated on kind of like a track of employment within a certain domain. So yeah, so I guess it's hire for skills or hire for talent. Like what would be your take on that?
I love the idea, and I support it completely. So I've got one slide that I try and show as often as I can, where it's a CEO saying, I've got this hiring thing waxed. I hire for attitude, I hire for approach, I hire for personal presence and all the skills in my company I'll teach you. And I think that's it. And to make yourself employable, you need to make yourself easy to work with, and you need the right approach. You need to have a positive demeanor and a can-do attitude. Now, there, I think South Africans are really good at that. I do a lot of work in Singapore where they get 99% for Singapore maths, but they can hardly do anything because if it's 1 millimeter to the left or right, they can't do it. They weren't taught it. Whereas we have a very can-do attitude. Why not hire for that approach? Why not give someone a lucky break? And I've got this lovely mental picture in my mind where I've got three bananas. One is a green banana, one is a perfectly yellow one, and one is a yellow one with black dots in it, showing young, the perfect banana. Everyone wants to hire that perfect banana. But why not give the green banana a shot? I put two 20-year-olds on my board. It's a game changer because they've got different ideas. Instead of going to the Parkhurst Bowling Club and having Prego rolls and Guinness beer, we went to Midrand and listened to DJ Fresh and danced. I mean, it was
Yeah, yeah,
it's a game
yeah,
changer. So we need to break that mold of this is the job description, this is the job specification, here's the grade. Give people a chance. Now in Singapore, if you've been in jail for a minor offense, let's say you weed in the street or you're arrested for something minor, you get what's called a yellow ribbon, and you pin the yellow ribbon because you got a criminal record, but there's a yellow ribbon, and Singapore companies have to employ 1% yellow ribbons. In other words, give them a second chance. Now, the yellow ribbons don't fit that job description perfectly. They don't fit the job specification perfectly, but you give them a shot, and we need to give the green bananas a shot.
yeah. It makes sense. The what I want to circle back to is because what you're saying is, hire for culture fit. Hire people who've got an attitude and a can-do thing that kind of fits with the culture of the organization. But at the same time, and to the earlier question that I asked you, culture is harder to, I guess, not pin down, but harder to create when everyone's working remotely. There's like culture's compromised, it feels to me. And what do you do as a company to try and retain key cultural elements when everyone's working from their own places?
Yeah, and I find that difficult as well. So what we've done, and the boards that I work with, we encourage once a week you have to come in. You can't just work remotely 100% of the time. There's a hybrid approach, and in that come in, it's an auditorium with 100 of us, and one of the business leaders addressing and talking about something interesting and getting people to connect. And what we found is there's a lot of professional loneliness, Hilton. So I think the pendulum of 100% away is going to swing back somewhere to the middle, where we are much more hybrid because of that professional loneliness and depression and suicides. It's a terrible thing to say, and I don't want to end the podcast as such a terrible note, but it's real. It's real. People are social people. They're social creatures, mostly. Even the introverts who draw energy from themselves need that human touch. To get in the culture means there's got to be a touch point. We need that again.
And the hybrid work is probably a solution if you're working remotely but you're local. But increasingly, your workers are spread into different provinces and maybe different countries. And, just getting the time zones right can be a hard thing. So, I mean, definitely these are big shifts. I mean, they're tectonic shifts in the way the world of work is changing. And I think we're all learning. I mean, you're at the rock face of those learnings. So it's really interesting to hear how you see these kind of things just finding traction.
Yeah, and I think we're at the early stages of learning. I know a lot of people say they've got all the answers, but I don't find there's anyone that has all the answers. And I think from having one culture, there are probably going to be multiple cultures, and there'll be a head office culture where everyone is sitting, but then there'll be a remote culture. And I've started realizing that sometimes the tone of our communication and the policies set culture as well. So you don't have to see the person. It's the tone of the newsletter. It's the tone of the policy. It's the tone of the that sets the culture, and people can pick that tone up and pick the culture from that, and that needs a lot more exploring and a lot more work.
Mark, my question is around poor performers. So you've got someone, they're lovely people and they fit the culture, but they're just lots of problems, lots of mistakes. They're just not able to keep up. Yeah, what is your approach to dealing with that?
Phew, that is a profound question. So, in the land of plenty, and there's lots of money, and things are cushy and fat, you carry that person because A for effort, F for results, and the A for effort means that they bring you the meal when auntie is sick, and they always there at 6 in the morning. They'll help you with when the photocopier is jammed. Okay, let's carry them. In the land of lean and mean, unfortunately, that person just does not survive anymore, and it has got quite brutal. And in a school environment, because I'm heavily involved with the schools, it's even worse because you've got school teachers that go to the canteen together. They live together almost, and now it's almost like getting rid of a family member, and it changes the culture of that school. It's much more difficult to do in certain environments. One also has to look into the future, and I have a feeling that crunch time's coming in Q2 of next year. All the yield indicators in Europe and China are saying that it's going to be a second global financial crisis of 2008, and it's going to put more pressure in the system. And again, once you've got the more pressure in the system, that poor performer, as hard as it is, one has to deal with it, because you'll sink the whole company. And it's that mental picture that I've got in my mind. If there's a river that's flowing strongly and someone's in it, and you have to reach from the side and put your hand in, you must be sure you can pull them out. If you're going to get pulled in yourself and die with them, then it's unhelpful. So you can't let the whole company fall into that river or the backwash. If you think of it as a picture, you actually have to do it for the greater good. That means your performance management systems need to be robust enough for you to tell who the poor performer is and defend your decision, because obviously it's a very unpopular decision. I think the shift from activities to outputs to now outcomes and impact is quite a real shift and quite a big shift. And job descriptions and performance compacts are being written for outcomes and impact and much more holistic. So we've had to move away from the word shareholder to stakeholder to stakeholderism. And that's quite a big issue when you get to annual general meetings where you've got all the institutional investors, you've got the board members there, you've got the executive there, and then you've got the consultant there who's the ham and the sandwich. And the investors are saying, we need more money. Otherwise, we're going to put our money elsewhere. The boards are saying, and the executive are saying, we need to look after the community, that the mine or the factory is or the bank branch is in a community, and we need to give up more of our money. So one of the big issues is institutional investors giving up more money. That way, the companies can do more training, and that poor performer is kind of taken care of. As long as we are in a very hard capitalism mode where it's shareholder or nothing, that poor performer doesn't stand a chance. Now, if you take it from one person to a collective, the trade union's job is to look after everybody, and that includes poor performers. So their job is becoming a lot more difficult. If you look at Transnet not being able to deliver, 35,000 jobs in the coal industry might be lost through no fault of their own. All of a sudden, the trade unions are now partners with Transnet. How can we fix this? Because we don't want jobs upstream and downstream from being lost, not due to poor performance, but due to poor performance of an entity as opposed to a person. So I think we're all in this boat together, and the faster we start working together, institutional investors, annual general meetings, boards, executive, trade unions, and government, it's the poor performer that's going to lose out. It's the poorest community that's going to lose out. And I think we need a social compact, which is something that government can do. It's very easy to just change the law by the stroke of a pen and welcome digital nomads into our country. They're not taking jobs because they're employed already, but they're going to spend their salary here. Why on earth would you not do that with a stroke of a pen? With a thing that a digital nomad can come here for 1, 3, or 5 years, as long as they keep their job, and they've got to prove that they've kept their job. In other words, they don't leave their job and then get a job here. There's no downside. So policy making sets the framework for a lot of this.
It's sometimes mind-boggling just to look, I mean, even if you look at like the kind of trade unions in the education system and the resistance to non-performing teachers and dealing with that issue, and even, I mean, not even non-performing teachers, like unskilled teachers who just have got, whatever, nothing. And it's just like it's in everybody's interest to create a generation of people with good education. I mean, there's like almost like no hope without it, and you just wonder, why isn't someone doing something about this? I mean, whatever, government, it's a government thing to sort out.
It takes political will.
It does.
And
Yeah.
if you're fighting for your life and you don't have a clear mandate, then you're putting out fires as opposed to being proactive. And that's,
Yeah.
in a nutshell, what stops it. But I call it the greatest skills mismatch of all time. Matriculants leave our schools, they go to universities, and I'm at universities as well. So what we get from the schools, we can't work with.
Yeah.
We work with them by hook or by crook. We get a couple of them through. They go to the big employers. They take a look at them and they say, we can't work with this. It's outdated. It's antiquated. They don't know the latest stuff. We've got 30 million unemployed people, and we've got thousands of vacancies in government, and 30 million can't fit into thousands. That has to be the greatest skill mismatch of all time.
Yeah.
So when it comes to pay, I might help a CEO who earns 52 million rand a year to structure their package tax efficiently. That's 1 million rand a week. That's 200,000 rand a day.
Yeah.
And that vertical gap is growing. And the reason for the vertical gap growing is that the CEO's role globally has become more complex.
Yeah.
300 years ago, I was the CEO in my town. 200 years ago, I was the CEO in the city. 100 years ago, I was the CEO in my country, and now I am a global CEO. So their pay has gone up exponentially as the job has become exponentially more complex.
Yeah.
Now, the person
Yeah.
making tea 300 years ago made tea almost the same way they make tea today.
Right. Yeah.
And their job is not getting more complex, which means their pay is not going up exponentially. So this vertical pay gap is growing internationally and will continue to grow. Halving CEO pay is not the answer, because there are 10,371 companies registered with the DTI. If you halved every CEO's pay, every worker would get 29 Rand extra a month. That's not enough. That's not going to cut it.
Yeah.
We have to do something profoundly different. And the profoundly different is government policy unlocking companies' ability
Completely.
to grow. And entrepreneurs, I've started a few business. I had to pay 250,000 Rand VAT before I'd been paid on my first invoice. And that can't be right. I mean, it's a stroke of the pen to change that. So that big businesses not hiring, SMMEs need to be encouraged to grow, but we're killing them with legislation before they get a chance to stand up.
Yeah. We live in that world. It's brutal. There's no doubt. Yeah.
So skills, you need a
Yeah.
skill that you can sell, and you need to wise up
Yeah.
on what the market is buying. And we're not doing enough of that.
Right.
So your question is, what do I tell my kids? I tell my kids, look at what the market is buying and skill up on what the market is buying. The market is not buying fine art masters in fine art and things like that.
A strong humanities background. Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
It's very brutal. It is very tough, but we have to adapt to what's going on around us, and if we don't, well, then you're going to suffer.
Mark, I was interested on your take, and I imagine that it's going to be positive, but around incentivizing knowledge workers. So consultants say in our professional space. So essentially they're knowledge workers, but they're also salespeople. How do you keep people engaged from a knowledge worker point of view? Do incentives work for them from a sales perspective?
So let's say you've got a big audit firm, a big law firm, a big consulting firm, and you've got a consultant working on a job doing job evaluation or doing a recruitment policy or doing a talent management thing or doing a legal case or an audit. Okay, half of the incentive is for completing that well, and you get some kind of reward. But there should be some kind of incentive to get them to on-sell. I've seen your job evaluation systems now in place, but to me it looks like your incentive schemes aren't aligned to the grades. Or I've seen, something in the audit or the legal opinion or in your talent management, but there's something wrong over there. And knowledge workers can on-sell, and I think that should be rewarded. And often enough, we don't. We don't reward that on selling. So that's a knowledge worker as a service provider in an organization like a big bank or a big manufacturing or industrial company. You have a lot of knowledge workers there, and they are part of incentive plans, and they do get incentivized. And I can tell you, it works. They wait for that bonus. So I think what gets rewarded gets done. And very often the students want to research, does money motivate? And 50 or 100 years ago, Maslow and Herzberg and Vroom and Lawler all said, money can't motivate you. It can only take you to there, but after that, um, but 100 years later, sorry, Maslow, but 100 years later, when I ask 100 MBAs, does money motivate you? 100 hands go up. And I don't know
Yeah.
why, and it's a bit tangential, but when you look at some of the buildings that were built in Europe 1,000 years ago, those buildings aren't being built anymore because something's happened. Things have got tighter, things have got harder, and I'm wondering if there isn't going to be a collapse. Will the bubble burst at some point?
Mm.
Our roads, we used to be
Yeah.
able to build big roads 50 years ago. Now it's very tight. But it's not just South Africa, it's everywhere. Things have got tighter. Europe, America, China, and it's got quicker. And remuneration has to play catch up to that. So one
Mm.
big thing with gig workers is that they're a contractor. The work will be like a contractor. So if I ask someone to build the wall at the bottom of my garden and they're going to quote me 50,000 Rand to build a wall, we're going to agree by when it's going to be built, what the quality of the wall should look like, what color you're going to paint it. When they've done that, I give them the 50,000, off they go. So gig workers need to get into their heads that they are small businesses. They have to send a proposal or a quote. They have to complete the work. They have to do the invoice themselves. They have to get the money and invest it wisely. They've got to do what a company does from start to finish, the full value chain. And not enough of our gig workers understand that. So there's a big space for educating gig workers on how the new pay system works. The incentives are actually working, and knowledge workers are keen for incentives. And when you ask people, does money motivate? The answer is absolutely yes. So we have to get better at tying those big incentives to company performance, and that's where the gap is. Sometimes a company performs poorly and the bonus is paid out, and sometimes it's paid really well, and the company's done well, and the directors are upset. I was called into one bank where the executive were very upset with their 9 million rand bonus. And I wanted to say, give it to me. I'll take it with pleasure and smile. What goes wrong is that their expectation of the payment relative to what they were asked to do wasn't clear enough. So good walls make good neighbors. You have to be crystal clear how the incentive scheme works and what the target is and where you are relative to that. And too often you get some guru in the back room designing the scheme. No one understands it. The chair and the CEO stand up at the AGM saying we've done exceptionally well against all the odds. And the employee says, but I only got 2 weeks pay. And there's a mismatch.
I've got one last question, and it's so obvious. I almost feel embarrassed to ask it, but here goes. I mean, we're entering the AI revolution, and there's definitely the detractors who are saying, it's the first time that humans lose control of technology. Technology makes decisions on humans' behalf. It's never happened before in human history, and AI is making decisions about loans, about banks, and lots of things. And there's the other people who say the world of possibilities are endless. Whatever. AI is going to enhance our lives. We're going to have these amazing assistants that are going to do all the grunt work for us. And there's only an upside with maybe some minor cautions about the downside. I mean, what's your take, Mark?
That's a great question. If you take schools, for example, should you allow the kids to use AI, ChatGPT, to research the history essay and hand it in? And even more so at university, should you allow people to use it and hand it in? I've come to the conclusion that ChatGPT and AI is not going to go away. So what the policy that we've implemented in schools and universities so far, and the ones that I'm involved in, which is quite a lot of them, is that they will be taught how to do it in class, how to interrogate it, how to spot fake news. Okay, it's not always possible, but what are the telltale signs? Pretty much like with phishing or phishing, when you get spam, we're all taught if the dot's there and if that's there and if that looks like that, so we're teaching kids the same, but for ChatGPT AI, it's here to stay, and I think that we have to use it and use it positively. I'm on the page that the human brain still controls that. I don't think that that's overtaken the human brain. So I think the naysayers are saying it's going to run the world and take over the human brain. I'm not in that camp. I'm in the latter part of your thing. Let's use it productively. Let's use it efficiently. Let's teach the kids and the university students how to use it properly and how to spot all the fake news. And I can tell you, there's one big job for a massive retail chain that I'm doing, and it's strategy, how to put them on the right strategy. And for fun, I just got onto ChatGPT and I said, what are the 10 things this company should do? And I printed the 10 things, and I said, go back 5 years on the financials and read the chairman's report and the CEO's report for the last 5 years. What should this company do? And 7 out of 10 things the CEO told me is what they'd paid McKinsey a few million US dollars to tell them. Yeah, yeah, that's how close it was. So sometimes it is spot on, but sometimes it's a lot of nonsense. So I think we have to teach everyone how to spot the true email address from the spam email address equivalent in AI, and schools have started doing that. Yeah.
I guess it's like all technology. I mean, it eventually all becomes weaponized. There's an amazing side and there's the difficult side. You've just got
And
to,
and you don't know
yeah,
that you need it until you've got it, Hilton. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
I didn't think I needed a microwave oven
yeah, yeah,
when I
yeah,
got one. I
yeah,
didn't think I needed a cell phone, but when I got one,
sure,
and now
absolutely.
that I've got internet, the world's my oyster. I've got everything, and I'm just growing and growing and growing. You got to stay ahead. It keeps you sharp, Hilton. It keeps. As a lecturer at university, I can go and do a talk on what are the compensation trends globally. Those people can Google it and get 10 trends and walk away from the lecture. I've got to say something that's not there. I've got to say something. And in this company, this is how we tackled this problem. AI can't
Yeah,
do that.
right. Yeah,
And AI doesn't have a heart. I mean, the intention was good. They got all these submarines with robots to pick up plastic off the bottom of the ocean, and the submarine couldn't tell the difference between a plastic bag and a jellyfish, and slaughtered 100 million jellyfish. So
sure.
yeah, it's yes, it's going to get better, but it still doesn't have a heart.
Hmm.
So I'm on the embrace it, use it wisely.
Yeah,
I think we still control it. I'm not on the page of it controls us. Looking into the crystal ball, what I realized about most crystal balling is that the pendulum swings from the one side to the other side to the one side. So if you take politics, it's left wing, then right wing, then left wing, and maybe in politics it's a few hundred years left wing, right wing, left wing. Europe's going to go very right wing because of some of the things that have happened there, and the right wing parties are growing. So from an employment condition point of view, it was very rigid. Now we've gone completely on the other side. I think the pendulum will swing back, but to the middle, not to the left or right. So I still think there'll be hybrid, and I still think that there'll be a core employees on job evaluation, pay scales, and incentive plans, but there'll be more gig workers which are contract, and there'll be a happy balance in the middle. And the one's going to look over the fence to the other and say it's not fair, and they're going to say, well, if you want to go over the fence, well, then go there, and that's what's going to happen. I think we are going to relax some of these antiquated ideas that we had. So moonlighting is a good example. Two or three or four editions ago, The Economist and Time magazine put out a very powerful article where they had a picture of a woman sitting on a chair, and she's a school teacher in America. And between 8 and 2 p.m., she's a school teacher, and between 3 and 6 p.m., she works at the builder's warehouse equivalent and works behind the counter. And between 7 and 10 p.m., she's a waitress. And that's okay. So is it okay to moonlight? Is a question that I think we need to ask ourselves. If you're a consulting company and you can't feed everyone properly and they start something that's not part of you, something different, yes, maybe that's okay. It's a much bigger problem in America where you're saying it's not okay to have 3 jobs. A school teacher should be able to earn enough to support herself, in the first place. So there are structural and policy changes that are going to be questioned much, much more, just to say, going into the future, is it necessary? When our consultants burn out, I'm not going to enforce the leave policy. They're going to go, they must go and leave and stay away. Don't come back here. You're useless to me as a burnt out person. Not to me, but to anyone, your family, that came out a bit wrong, but you're no good to anyone if you are, if you are, if you're burnt out. So this whole thing of wellness is also taken huge leaps forward. I mean, 10, 20 years ago, you didn't mind telling people you went to the gym and your Pilates class and all of that, looking after your physical health. And mental health was a taboo. There's something wrong with you, loony. But now to say, I'm going to my mental health coach, it's not as bad. I mean, a lot of us have got mental health coaches, and looking after mental health has become as important. And thank you for COVID. So COVID did bring a lot of positive things. I mean, I'm much more fastidious now about how much sleep I get. I try and get enough sleep. I didn't before COVID. I didn't really think about it. But now, simple things, looking after my own health and wellness, and companies are doing that too. And thank you for that, COVID.
Thanks, Mark. It was a great chat. Yeah.
Thank you very, very much. I've enjoyed it immensely, and have a beautiful weekend.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Radio Omnicor. A huge thanks to Dr. Mark Bussin for shedding light on the ever-evolving realm of compensation. And to you, our listeners, your support means everything. Thank you so much. Do dive into the show notes for more insights and resources. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you're keen. It really does help our podcast grow.